The FBI says it's investigating dozens of mysterious drones spotted in New Jersey. Sightings have been reported above military bases, a naval weapons station, and even flying near President-elect Donald Trump's golf course. Some members of Congress are now demanding answers.
The first sighting came on a Wednesday night in November, over a fence line that almost no civilian in America ever thinks about. Picatinny Arsenal sits in the rolling hills of Morris County, New Jersey, about 40 miles west of Manhattan. For more than a century, the United States Army has built and tested weapons there. Artillery shells, warheads, the science of munitions itself. The airspace above Picatinny is restricted by federal law. Nothing flies over it without permission. On the night of November 13, 2024, something did. Army officials would later confirm that what crossed the perimeter that evening was the first of 11 unauthorized drone sightings over the arsenal in the next 23 days. Not one, 11. They kept appearing even after the Federal Aviation Administration tightened the airspace restriction. They appeared at night. They flew with lights on, in formation, sometimes in silence. And when the soldiers on the ground tried to track them, the drones simply kept going, vanishing into the dark hills of northern New Jersey. In the weeks that followed, the rest of the state began to notice them too. In Montvale, a small borough in Bergen County tucked against the New York line, the mayor's phone began to ring. Residents stood in their driveways, pointing upward. Mayor Mike Gasali stepped outside himself. What he spotted, he told reporters, did not resemble any consumer drone he had ever heard of. He described the largest of them to the New York Post as roughly the size of a small school bus, maybe 15 or 20 feet across. They moved, he explained, in tandem, pattern-like, back and forth, over the reservoir, over the downtown, over the shopping centers where families were already pulling out Christmas lights. The story spread the way stories spread in 9 million people stacked tightly between two great cities. A neighbor spotted something, then a neighbor of a neighbor, then the local news, then the national news. By the end of November, drone reports were flooding in from at least 10 different New Jersey counties, from the suburbs of New York to the Pine Barrens of the South. And then, on the night of November 26th, the story stopped being strange and started being dangerous. A car crash had happened near Raritan Valley Community College in Somerset County. Firefighters were already working the scene. A medical evacuation helicopter was inbound, the kind of aircraft that does not ask whether a patient can wait. Brian Surge, the security supervisor at the college, watched as 3 drones appeared in the airspace the helicopter needed to use. The firefighters on the ground made the call. They waved the medevac off. The helicopter aborted its approach. The drones, whoever owned them, had just interfered with an emergency medical response in the most densely populated state in America. For most Americans of a certain age, the sky over New Jersey is the sky you cross to reach somewhere else. It is the view from the window seat on the descent into Newark. It is the corridor between Philadelphia and New York that millions of commuters travel through every working day of their lives. It is one of the busiest pieces of airspace on the planet, and in the final weeks of 2024, something was loose inside it that no one in the United States government would publicly name. On December 4th, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced an active investigation and asked the public for tips. The phrase the FBI chose was deliberately bland. Large drones, unidentified, New Jersey. The agency provided a phone number and a website, and almost nothing else. 4 days later, the story moved offshore. On the night of December 8th, a United States Coast Guard patrol boat was working the waters of the Atlantic off the New Jersey coast. A sailor aboard that boat later described the encounter to the New York Post. It was about 9 o'clock at night. The drones appeared, in his words, out of nowhere. He counted somewhere between 12 and 30 of them. Each one stretched roughly 7 feet across, with 4 propellers. They were not flying past. They were following the boat. For about 15 minutes, the swarm tracked the Coast Guard vessel through the dark. When the boat changed course, the drones changed course with it. Congressman Chris Smith, a Republican who has represented parts of New Jersey since 1981, told colleagues that more than a dozen drones had chased that patrol boat. At a House hearing in the middle of December, Smith used the phrase "very serious threat." He went further. He suggested it could be a foreign power. He named Russia. He named China. His colleague from the southern part of the state, Congressman Jeff Van Drew, pushed further still. He told reporters publicly that he had information suggesting an Iranian mothership might be parked off the New Jersey coast, launching drones from the deck of a ship into the airspace of the United States. The Pentagon denied it the same day. There was no Iranian mothership off New Jersey, the Department of Defense insisted. There was no foreign vessel of that description in those waters. But the denial did not put the drones back in their boxes. They kept appearing. They turned up near Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst, the largest military installation in the state. They turned up near the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, the private property of the man who, by mid-December, was the President-elect of the United States. They appeared over reservoirs, over electrical transmission lines, over the parking lots of suburban police departments at 3 o'clock in the morning. On December 11th, NPR published a national story confirming sightings in at least 10 counties. The same day, the New Jersey State Police held a classified briefing for state legislators at headquarters in Trenton. Governor Phil Murphy, the chief executive of the state, was not in the room. State Senator Dawn Fantasia, who attended, tweeted out her notes afterward. The briefing, according to her account, raised more questions than it answered. Senator Cory Booker called for more transparency. The Florham Park police chief told reporters that the drone's presence appeared, in his word, nefarious. The mayor of Montvale kept describing what he had witnessed with his own eyes. School bus-sized, moving in formation, over his town. And then came what became known among the small community of reporters following the story closely as the week of mixed messages. On Tuesday, December 17th, President Joe Biden stood before reporters and told the country that there was, in his words, nothing nefarious in the skies over New Jersey. The same day, members of Congress walked out of a classified briefing in Washington and informed the press that the sightings posed no threat to the public. Less than 24 hours later, the Federal Aviation Administration imposed sweeping temporary flight restrictions across nearly 24 New Jersey cities. The restrictions were not symbolic. According to the FAA's own announcement on December 18th, reported by Reason magazine, the new airspace bans were backed by authorization for deadly force. The United States government, one day after the President of the United States told the country there was nothing to worry about, gave its agencies the authority to shoot things out of the sky over Bergen and Morris and Somerset counties. That same week, federal authorities quietly expanded the scope of the investigation. They acknowledged for the first time that they were now examining drone sightings over military bases across the entire country, not just New Jersey, everywhere. For Americans watching this unfold on the cable news scroll during the last weeks before Christmas, the contradiction felt almost too clean to be accidental. Nothing nefarious, but deadly force authorized. No foreign threat, but an active investigation. No answers, but classified briefings. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, offered a partial explanation. Some of what people were spotting, he claimed, were not drones at all. They were manned aircraft, ordinary planes, commonly mistaken for drones in the dark. That was almost certainly true of some sightings. It did not explain the 11 incursions over Picatinny. It did not explain the swarm that shadowed the Coast Guard cutter. It did not explain the school bus. The temporary flight ban over the New Jersey cities was set to expire in the middle of January 2025. By then, the national media had largely moved on. A new presidential administration took office on January 20th. The cameras went elsewhere. The story, as a story, ended. The drones did not end. Or rather, no one ever announced that they had ended. The sightings simply tapered. The phones stopped ringing in Montvale. The night skies over Picatinny fell quiet again, or quiet enough. In May 2025, Reason magazine published an analysis of newly released federal documents detailing what various agencies had known during those 6 weeks. The documents confirmed the timeline. They confirmed the contradictions. They did not, in any meaningful sense, confirm what the drones were, or who flew them, or why they came. In November 2025, on the 1-year anniversary of the first sighting over Picatinny Arsenal, the New York Post published a long retrospective. Dozens of individual sightings, the paper reported, remained officially unresolved. No agency of the United States government had offered a public accounting. And there was one new detail in the Post's reporting, a detail that had circulated quietly among local witnesses for months, but had never been formally addressed by any federal agency. At least one of the larger craft, according to eyewitness accounts gathered by the paper, appeared to take control of smaller recreational drones flying nearby, to commandeer them, a capability that, if real, belongs to no consumer technology sold in the United States. There is a particular kind of American story that the people of New Jersey understand better than most. It is the story of something happening in plain sight, in the most heavily populated and heavily surveilled corridor of the country, while the institutions that are supposed to explain the world to us go quiet at exactly the moment they should speak. It happened with the chemical plumes over the meadowlands a generation ago. It happened with the strange lights spotted by airline pilots over the Hudson in earlier decades. It is happening now. The mayor of Montvale still stands in his driveway sometimes and looks up. The soldiers at Picatinny still walk the perimeter. The Coast Guard still patrols the waters off Sandy Hook and Cape May. And somewhere in a federal building in Washington, the files on what crossed the New Jersey sky in the last weeks of 2024 sit in a drawer or in a server, marked with a classification that ordinary citizens are not permitted to read. The drones came. They flew over reservoirs and military bases and the homes of 9 million people. They blocked a medevac helicopter from reaching the victims of a car crash. They followed a Coast Guard boat through the dark Atlantic for 15 minutes. They were witnessed by a sitting mayor, by a security supervisor at a community college, by a United States sailor, by police chiefs, by state legislators, by ordinary people standing in their backyards on cold November nights. And then, without explanation, they were gone. The question that lingers is not really about the drones. It is about us, about how long a country can watch something inexplicable cross its own sky, in its own most crowded state, and accept silence as an answer. In New Jersey, a year later, the porch lights still flick on at dusk, and every so often, someone steps outside, tilts their head back, and watches the sky a little longer than they used to.